Oh, you're muted.
Started off muted. Good morning, everyone. Brian from City of the Immaculata here. Memento mori to you all. As you can see by the date of this recording and my forehead, we are in the season of Lent. It's a funny thing for this channel because I am a person with a whole host of interests and passions and love, and I really struggle to limit the scope of what I present to people on this channel. I've named this channel City of the Immaculata. And while, as far as the faith goes, I think I broaden the scope a little bit. But as far as my personal interests goes, there's a lot of self-editing that I do. Uh, with that said, today I'm going to be discussing something that I have wanted to discuss with you guys for a long time, but never really had an opportunity to. And my friend Eddie here is joining me, and he's giving me the perfect opportunity to discuss the subject of martial arts. Now, for those of you guys that have been following me for a long time, you'll know in the way back machine, you go deep down into my list of videos, somewhere around the beginning, I did do a short video just on my own history with martial arts, and we'll maybe revisit some of that today. But again, it's not something I've discussed very often. That said, Eddie here is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. We're going to get into the topic of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, but I just want you guys to know that for if you don't speak the lingo, what that means is that Eddie can probably beat you up and you can't beat him up. To translate that for you all, right? They just don't hand out black belts in any of the martial arts, but to become a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu means that you've done your work, you've put the discipline in, you've put the time in. So I just really excited to bring Eddie on to discuss this topic. So Eddie, good morning.
Good
Thanks for
morning.
joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about this. Actually, this is the topic that I've talked about most. I've just recently started to be doing the Catholic thing. I kind of did it the opposite of you. I started with jujitsu, and now I'm retroactively going backwards and seeing, wow, there's a lot more that correlates between martial arts, jujitsu, and that disciplined life and the Catholic life. So hopefully we could try to join that together and show people, what jujitsu is a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm interested in your own. Well, I guess maybe quickly because we had mentioned this before we went live, and it'd probably be just a little bit useful for the audience. Just quickly, my own history is I was 17, maybe 18 years old, and I was a huge fan of Bruce Lee. It's a story that's been told probably a million times at this point, right? Like young boy discovers Bruce Lee, young boy finds a martial arts school. And in my neighborhood, there actually was a Wing Chun Kung Fu school, which is the school that Bruce Lee originally came through. So this was back in the days, the earlier days of the internet, right? I'm old enough to remember those days, and in those days, the internet, I say, was like a glorified phone book. So I looked up online. I think I typed in Kung Fu in the city that I was in, and a list of teachers and names came up, and I picked a teacher. And in hindsight, I was very fortunate to have picked the teacher that I did because, as it turns out, unlike some of the other teachers of this particular martial arts, he was very open to trying other martial arts. And so, in that school, while he taught us Wing Chun, he also taught us. We were learning Muay Thai, right? We were learning the Thai kickboxing. We were learning. Some people call it Kali Salat. Some people call it Eskrima. It's Filipino stick fighting, which is laced with the tinge of Spanish fencing. The Filipinos are an interesting bunch. And then we were doing one called Amok, which is sort of a blend of Filipino stick fighting with knife fighting. And then one day, and you'll probably get a kick out of this, Eddie. One day I show up, none of the other kids are there, and the coach says to me, "Hey, you want to try something different?" And he knew me. I was like, "Yeah, sure, let's try something different." So he's like, "All right, lay on your back. I'm gonna get on top. You're gonna try to get up." I was like, "That's a little different, but okay." I never struggled so hard in my life. At this point, I had no idea what was happening. Right, I had no idea jujitsu. I had no context whatsoever. And without being too graphic, once by the time I was done, I had to excuse myself because I had lost my lunch at that point. It was the hardest I had ever worked in a martial arts, and he didn't break a sweat. Turns out he had at that point recently started training in jujitsu. And so that's sort of my own history, which I was like, okay, yeah, this is different. This is something different. So maybe just to begin with, Eddie, I think I've kind of learned over the years that you can't assume people's knowledge of martial arts, especially when it comes to something as different as jujitsu. If you could start us off, could you maybe tell us a little bit about what maybe what most people have in mind when they think of martial arts, karate, the Karate Kid, Jackie Chan movies. Start with that, and then kind of lead us into Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, which is a different ball game altogether.
Well, if you bring it all the way back to Bruce Lee, he kind of is the godfather of mixed martial arts. Like if you ask Dana White, he gives a big credit to Bruce Lee because he was willing to try all these different things and he was willing to put them together. Old school martial arts was you karate, you do karate. We don't train outside of karate. That's what you do, karate. And that's how it is for all these things. Boxing, wrestling, all of it. We always just pick one and this one's the best. And people would sell that to you. Decades and decades. That's how it was. And then these crazy Brazilians, they took this thing, jujitsu. It was judo. This guy from judo came over from Japan to Brazil, and they took the submission aspect and they went all in on that. And they would just fight. They would just prove it. They would just have these big fights, and they would try to prove that jujitsu is the best. When I was a kid, I played baseball. I didn't do any martial arts. I tried karate once. I couldn't break the board. I quit. So that's what it was. It was more belt testing, and yeah, it was popularized by a movie, right? Karate and all these things. Jiu-Jitsu was popularized by Ultimate Fighting, like UFC 1. When that came out, there was people that would pretend. There's still people that kind of sell you a thing that's not real, and there was no way to test it because, if I had to test that, I would actually kill you. Well, now here's an opportunity where go ahead. There's no rules here. Let's see what's best. And the first few UFCs, it was jiu-jitsu. That was number one. That was the king. So it really did change everything with the way society saw martial arts and fighting. Because I used to be a big wrestling fan, and when I was a kid in the '90s, you don't know what's real, what's not. There was a lot more of the kayfabe. Now it's more out in the open, and they talk about it as entertainment, not as a sport or as a real fight. So when I was a teenager, the Ultimate Fighting Championship came out on Spike TV, season 1. It was 2005. And me and my friends, when we saw that, it was the perfect time to see that. And we used to fight each other. We used to go out in the backyard or out. We had this field that we go to, and we would just wrestle each other. And all we knew was rear naked choke. That was it. Because we saw Diego Sanchez do rear naked choke. So now we're just going to try to get on each other's backs and choke each other out, which actually isn't a terrible way to train because if you can get to the back, that's the best. But me as a kid, I just saw it as a fight. I just saw these guys know how to fight the best. I want to be the best fighter. So where is a school that teaches fighting? And luckily for us, I mean, in like probably when you were learning jiu-jitsu or with your friend, like very sparse. There was almost no black belts in America at that time. By the time I'm coming to train, there's more American black belts. There's not a lot, but there's around the area, my area, there was a few that learned directly from the Gracies. So the Gracies are the name. That they were the people that popularized it. They didn't create it, but they did make it popular. When Royce Gracie won UFC 1, that's when all the Brazilians started coming up from Brazil, and they opened these big schools in New York, or they go out west to California. And now California is the hub of all jiu-jitsu in the world. All the best jiu-jitsu guys, they come and they compete there. They train there. And I guess I'm kind of jumping ahead, but what initially was for me was we could just wrestle. Like you said, you go in as hard as you can, and you're not really getting hurt because we're just grappling around. And it's more than wrestling because wrestling, it's a pin, and they have very specific rules. When it comes to grappling, the rule set changes what the name of it is, but it's all grappling. Wrestling is grappling, judo's grappling, jiu-jitsu's grappling. They have different types of wrestling, Greco wrestling for the upper body, and there's all different rules. You can pin, or like Sambo has strikes. So I didn't understand that this world that I entered into of martial arts and jiu-jitsu is a very relaxed style because it's so new and because the Brazilians culture, it kind of bled into jiu-jitsu as a whole. When you show up to class, sometimes you show up 10 minutes late, no big deal. Some schools there's no bowing. There's no tradition that's kind of wrapped into it because it's brand new. So some of these other martial arts are, hundreds if not 1,000 years old, and they have a very strict way to do things, and there's only a certain way that you could practice them, like any striking, like Muay Thai. If you're going to practice Muay Thai, that's a painful kind of practice. Jiu-jitsu, it's not that way. It's really a more laid back, relaxed style. If it wasn't that way, I wouldn't do it. Like wrestling, I'm very lazy. If I had to wrestle, you need to be in peak physical condition, and or else you're just going to get injured. And it's more of a young man's game. But if you do jiu-jitsu, it's more of a lifetime uh, commitment, and that's one of the main things that ties it to Christianity. Is this not a once saved always saved? The Catholics, we don't believe that. You work out your faith in fear and trembling. Same thing with jiu-jitsu. I still get scared sometimes when I go on the mats and I'm a black belt because I'm in a room with tough people that are going to push me, and we live in a tough world that's always going to push you. And it really is about learning how to endure and turn the suffering into, for jiu-jitsu's sake, technique.
Yeah, and I love how you bring up the fact that it's because again, some of this stuff I can't assume that the people listening are kind of um, aware of some of this, but if you're aware of Brazilian culture, and Eddie was just mentioning how the sort of culture has seeped into the style, there's so much truth to that. Because yeah, the as as an Anglo myself, right, the people of the British Isles, right? Like we love structure, we love order, we love discipline, we love all of these things. And it's not that the Brazilians aren't disciplined. They just there's a sort of chaos to their discipline. Um, and it used to kind of drive me insane, but then I kind of got to where I was like, okay, I get this now. I kind of get what they're doing. There is a much more laid back structure to it. And at the same time, Rio de Janeiro, especially in the 20th century, all of Brazil in the 20th century was a very it was politically volatile. It was socially volatile. The streets that the Gracies, this family, this sort of martial arts dynasty, if you will, was coming up in was like really rough and tumble kind of streets. And if you were gonna come around in Rio in those days and say I've got the best martial arts, in the U.S., it's sort of a dead giveaway when you walk into a dojo or any kind of school and they say my technique is so deadly I can't try it on anyone, right? Like, so for you, those of you guys that have ever heard that, or if you walk into a school and you hear that, that should kind of raise a red flag because yeah, in Rio, you had to back up your words. And, one thing I know the Gracies, there's some controversial things about the Gracie family, but one thing, I don't think that you could take from them is they were always willing to put themselves out there. The family was, especially in those days in Rio, you had you had the father, Elio Gracie, willing to fight. Who was the Japanese wrestler at that time? Famous Kimura, right? Is it
Yeah,
Kimura?
yep.
Yep, came in and was willing to challenge Kimura. Huge size difference, right? So that's another thing too. Like weight class wasn't so much. Then you had in the 70s or 80s, I want to say, you had Hickson Gracie coming up, and he fought Zulu, I think was the guy's name, a famous Brazilian wrestler. And then right on up into the USA, you had them opening up the UFC, and it was for those of you who want an introduction into what real fights look like, and you don't want to go into like the dark web to find, because real fights are an incredibly brutal thing to watch. The UFC, those early days of the UFC were about as real as you could get to like a street fight, like just a nasty street fight. And then I don't think there was anything so glaring in the martial arts world as you take you remember that UFC fight one, that first fight, it was like a sumo wrestler versus like a Savat guy, I think. And first thing the Savate guy did was kick the sumo wrestler in the face, and you see blood and you see a tooth go flying. So, but then comparing that, and this is kind of like the stress that I think we're trying to get at here. To a few fights later, you see Royce Gracie come out, and it's not only incredibly effective, which we can touch upon, but it's also just incredibly, like you were saying, it was almost kind of, for lack of a better word, kind of graceful. It was, kind of calm. You didn't see Royce really break I mean, I'm sure he was sweating, but you didn't see, you could tell his energy levels were low for those fights, where the other guys, they're throwing kicks, they're throwing punches, they're getting winded really quick. And so I think that's a huge differential between maybe some of you guys that may be watching this that are familiar with it. Most of the time you have in mind, especially now that the UFC is as large as it is, you kind of think those punches, kicks, all of that stuff. Whereas specifically what Eddie's talking about here is with grappling, like you were saying, there's a wide swath of what qualifies as grappling. But for the Brazilian Jiu Jitsu specifically, it's a much more calmer approach, subdued, but also incredibly effective. So could you speak to a little bit about the effectiveness of the art in your opinion?
The real effectiveness lies in leverage. Is leveraging your opponent's energy and leveraging their joints, finding the weakness of the human body and exploiting it. And it's a lot of 2, 3 versus 1s. So the way I teach a lot of guys, some of the passes and like, let's look at an armbar. The reason an armbar is effective is because you're using 2 arms and 2 legs against 1 arm. You put them in a position where you get all 4 of your limbs versus 1 to maybe 2 of their limbs. And there's all these little interactions. It's not just submissions where you could just try to overwhelm them in different spots at the same time as not leaving yourself open. And the problem with grappling is the same with faith. If you never grappled, it's hard to explain why you can't get off that floor. Like if I laid on top of you right now, you're not going to get up.
Mm-hmm.
Unless, I mean, you want to try to bite me and stuff, then I'll bite back.
Yeah.
And I'll win. So, and the amount of energy that you exert, sometimes you see these guys up against the fence and the other guy's leaning on him, and you're like, what is that guy doing? Why can't he just get away from him? Like, why is this why is this so much energy? Because it's all, everything's tense. And you could feel that when you're close to somebody, the closer you get, the more you could feel their energy. When you're right on top of somebody and you have skin to skin contact, there's a language that is being spoken that you don't even realize. And especially if you're untrained, if I grab a hold of you, I know how much training you have immediately based on how you tense and where you tense and what you try to get away from me or what you try to give up. A lot of people turn and run away and they give up their back, which they don't understand. That's the worst possible thing you could do. Like, I want my chest on your back. I win. That's the worst possible position. Sometimes people's instinct is to just run away. Like, I don't want my back to be on the floor. I'd rather you have my back and I protect my front, which is counterintuitive to what is actually going on. Like, I want to be on your back because there's nothing you could do to me really when I'm behind you. But if we're both in front of each other, there's stuff we both could do to each other. And especially in a fighting situation, if I can hit you in the back of the head, there's a reason why that's one of the rules in UFC. You can't hit to the back of the head because it's the most vulnerable spot. But in jiu-jitsu, we're trying to get to the most vulnerable spot and control it. Like, we just get control, and then I'll tap your shoulder and say, all right, let's start again. Because that's one of the things I do. Like, even not submissions, I'll start in a position where I'm mounted on top of you. Get away from me. Once you get away, we'll shake hands, start over. Or I'm on your back. Get me off, and then we'll start over. Like, that's some of my favorite training is positional training, because if you could learn how to get comfortable in every position, then the submissions will start to present themselves. So that's one of the main lessons my teacher taught me early is position over submission. You want to be able to control the fight instead of just finish it. Because sometimes you can finish fights in cheap ways, but if you train with the same people over and over again, these cheap tricks aren't going to win. So you want a foundational style, fundamental style that you'll be safe in all aspects. So maybe they're doing something you're not sure of. If you have the fundamentals settled, then you'll be protected. I think the same thing applies to Catholicism. If you know the fundamentals, you'll know when things are out of step. Maybe I haven't seen this before, but I know that's not Jesus because I know Jesus well. And if it's outside of Jesus, there's probably a pretty good chance it's not a good thing.
Yeah, and I think the leverage too, and just to stress this, guys, like when he's talking about leverage, He's not talking like about like Hapkido, and I'm not making like the and and none of this I want to come off sounding like I'm like dissing other martial arts, right? Because all martial arts have like really talented practitioners, especially if you're like super athletic, right? But like if you see Hapkido, they talk about leverage, right? But they're like flipping a guy over their arm while they're standing up. Like this is a different thing altogether. And I think a huge point of difference, and if you watch those earlier UFCs, you'll see it right away, is the fact that when a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy speaks of leverage, he's talking about ground leverage. And uh, the worst thing that you could ever do is let a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy get you to the ground. And that's exactly where they're going to get you. So, and that's the other thing too, right? Is the most naturally speaking, for an untrained person, the most uncomfortable place to be, you would psychologically think, is on the ground on your back. Now, technically, as Eddie pointed out, the worst place to be is to give your back to someone. But if you just take an average person, right, they don't want to be on the ground on their back with a person over top of them, standing on them, sitting, whatever it is. Um, that's exactly what you train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Uh, you you train a lot of things, but a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy, unlike I think really any other martial art, I think you guys excel at that, right? You excel it on your back on the ground. And especially with the thing like guard, I don't know. Is there an equivalent in any other martial arts to the guard, or is that unique to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu?
You mean laying on your back?
Well, specifically putting someone in guard.
Well, there's different types of guard. I think you're specifically talking like close guard.
Yeah, closed guard, yes. Sorry.
No, I don't. I don't see why there would be.
I don't think wrestling. I know.
Now wrestling, like there's no wrestling where you want to be on your back.
Yeah, so I think that's unique to you guys, right? I think that's something that and so you kind of take the worst case scenarios and you make that your comfort zone. And then not only that, but you train in such a way that you're putting people in those positions where, yeah, naturally speaking, they don't want to be, and then they're kind of stuck there. And it's almost without, maybe you could get like a really sharp guy who kind of figures out right away. But what's going to happen to most people, and this is what I did my first training, you just exhaust yourself. All right. And that guy, he had not taken he's a black belt today, but all those years ago, he had just started taking jujitsu. And that's another amazing thing about jiu-jitsu too, which we can touch upon, is that it doesn't actually require the kind of physical excellence that some other martial arts require. He didn't break a sweat. He wasn't out of breath, and I was just done. I was like my tank was I was totally gassed within, I want to say, 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes at most, just trying to get up. And you guys are just amazing at that ability to, what's the word I'm looking for? Conserve. You're conserving your energy. And then the other beautiful thing about it too, which it is, I mean, again, if you watch real street fights, which I've done, and I don't recommend doing it. I'm sure you've seen them before, Eddie, but like
Rainbow
real
Six.
street fights are like awful, man. They're a
Oh,
terrible thing to like witness. But if you watch a jujitsu guy, it's almost like a beautiful thing to witness at like how they're able to. And again, there's a difference between the whole street versus sport jujitsu. But I've seen some. I like there's a wonderful clip. I've showed it to my son. My son's actually training now. And there's this wonderful clip of a black belt. You may have seen it. He's out of Chicago or somewhere like that. And it was in a gas station, and there was a incident where I think somebody was drunk or high or something, and they exploded on this cashier. And a black belt just happened to be in the convenience store. He's like there picking up some drinks for his kids or something like that. And he witnesses this incident. But then, and this actually, Eddie, I think can get us to kind of maybe a conversation about how this ties into sort of Christian ethics, which I wanted to touch upon today. There's video of this guy. Maybe if I can find it, I'll link it in the description. But you think most martial arts, right? Like you run into a situation like that, And if all you've ever trained to do is like beat someone into the ground, punch their face or gouge their eyes out, like that's what your arsenal is. That's what you know how to do. This guy takes this belligerent man, gets him to the ground. As you were saying, he doesn't even submit him. He just controls him. And they like wait for the police. And that's not an exciting thing. That's, yeah, it doesn't make the evening news because it's not like a street fight, but it was an incredibly like I think powerful thing to witness, to see the efficacy of this um, two guys similar size, but this other guy takes him right to the ground, and the belligerent guy, besides, well, sometimes when a guy's high, he becomes incredibly strong, anyways, right? So
Yeah.
that's not a giveaway that just because he's high, he's going to be weaker than you. But no, he got him on the ground. He got him into what's the position? You hold them on their side, and you're kind of on top. They're on the ground on their side, and then he held the guy's own arm around.
Oh, like a gift wrap.
Yeah, yeah, the gift wrap, and just held him there till the police came. There's nothing the guy could do about it. So, yeah, that's sort of a transition, I think, to the maybe speak a little bit. And I'm not trying to like present like jujitsu's. It somehow does this thing where it's like incredibly tough, incredibly effective, but also it's not a blood sport. It's not like a bloodbath, right?
Yeah, they call it the gentle art.
Yeah.
And I think it is. I mean, I've seen blood. I've seen people pass out. I've seen people get hurt. It's still a martial art. It's still dangerous. But the risk versus reward is definitely worth it for what you're going to get. And like you said, like you can fully exert yourself to the point of throwing up, which I've done many times. But you're fine. You're not, it's just a little winded. And there's these different tools that you have. Like when you're a white belt, all you have is your strength, your effort, and your athleticism. That's it. You don't have technique behind it. Maybe you have a little flexibility. Like there's all these different buckets where you want to have filled up. Like a black belt has a lot of these buckets filled up. It's not just technique. Right now I'm out of shape, so I could give you 2 good minutes, and if you could weather my 2 good minutes, maybe you have a chance. But even still, there's so many other things that tricks up my sleeve. But what you mentioned earlier goes into what I was talking about with Musashi. He's the most famous Japanese samurai, and he did the sword. I mean, instead of using just martial arts or just judo or just up hand-to-hand combat, he used different weapons and things. But it always comes back to the same thing that you mentioned, and this is one of Musashi's quotes: "Do not attempt to oppose the way of the universe, but first make sure you know the way of the universe." So this is understood that the true power lies in conserving your energy and be precise with your efforts and your movements. And one of the things is they might use a little bit of effort in a spot, but only that spot. I don't need more than that. Like you don't need to use more than you have. And when you're a white belt, you just use it all because I don't have anything else. So you expend it, and you're trying to fight against me instead of adapting and switching to overcome. And I think in life, it's the same thing. Like one of the Bible passages that kind of correlates, but it's not exactly, is whoever is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who has a hasty temper exalts folly. So if you try to rush, if you try to use your anger instead of calming yourself and because that's what gets you all worked up too. Like people that have adrenaline dumps in UFC, even if you've trained 3 months for this, you don't prepare for that moment when everybody's looking at you, the lights are on, the pressure is on. And that's one of the things that I learned during competition that you can't get out of just a training room, is when you get on the mats and everybody's looking at you, especially when you're a black belt. Now everybody looks, even if people that don't know you, like, oh, he has the belt on. Let's see what he has. So now everybody's watching you, and you've been training and you've been teaching. And now are you going to be able to spend that energy wisely? Like, does this mean too much to you now? Another one of the things that Musashi teaches, it's not about winning and losing. If you make it too much on that, everything is going to be tied to these outcomes. And these are things that I learned before I went back to Christianity that stuck with me, and they're still here now. It's not about winning and losing. That's not what it's about. I mean, it's fun to win and it sucks to lose, and those are motivating factors. But if you make that your whole existence, you're not going to get there. That's why a lot of people don't make it to black belt, because they're so focused on, I want to be the best at this. I want to beat this guy, comparing yourself to others, that kind of thing. When it doesn't have to be about that. It's, can I control my emotion in this scenario, and it might just be my first time in the room. Like that's the scariest moment of a jujitsu experience is your first class. You don't know these people. You don't know exactly what this is about, what it's going to feel like. Like you're putting your faith in them that they're not going to hurt you. That's one of the dangerous things about joining a jujitsu gym is not all teachers are created equal. Any martial arts, not all teachers
Mhm.
are created equal. They have their cliques, they have their incentives or what they're trying to do. And I think if you're a good Christian, you can kind of read that on people, and that could protect you before you even get on the mats with anybody. Is your measure of who you're dealing with, because if you're not dealing with a virtuous person, it's a real dangerous place to be. That's why it's a double edged sword to join this kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's as far as what the history of these sort of competitive martial arts, if you will, like one of the complaints that you'll often hear is, okay, well, in the age of guns and weapons, and if this is all about self defense, like we're beyond that, right? And I would actually agree that one of the last things that you want to do is put yourself in a situation or end up in a situation where it's you mano a mano with the man on the street. Especially if you don't know him, you don't know what he's got, you don't know what he's capable of. It's an all around bad position to be in. That said, I do believe that there is a benefit to mastering something like a martial arts. I would, as long as you got a good teacher, I would generally say just about any martial arts is better than no martial arts. But the thing about jujitsu is it's not only teaching you something that is applicable, that you're really, with very few exceptions, one of the few martial arts where you are real time in the gym applying what you would likely be applying in a street situation, as close as you're ever going to get within a martial arts, right, where you're not risking breaking your own limbs and these kinds of things. um I was, oh, there was a point, lost the train there. What was I talking about before that? um my son walked out, so sorry, it confused me. But no, that's right. Yeah, so what I was saying was that one of the things about this is that it's almost like, and you hear this comparison a lot, and if you're in the gym and if you try jujitsu, you know what this is like. It's almost like a chess match in many ways. And I think that's part of what you were getting at, right? Where you were saying, as you, with all the years of like sensitivity that you have, put to this art, it's like if you're a chess master and you sit down across from another person, a chess master will tell you, I know what this game's going to be like the moment that person makes their first move. You know what I mean? And then there's like whatever move that they give you. Martial arts is not often like that, but there's something about the environment of jujitsu that's very chessman like. And I think that alone, in terms of the applicability of that, how it relates to other areas of life. And again, as a black belt, Eddie, I'm sure you could attest to this. I'm sure there's probably things where you're strategizing through I'm trying to, like, what would be a good example, right? Like how do I get this person's arm free or whatever it may be? Like, while that may not sound applicable to other things in your life, the ability to think, it's just like chess, right? Like people will say, like once you've kind of mastered chess, it helps you think through other things in life. Does that make sense what I'm saying there?
Oh, absolutely, for sure. I didn't play chess a lot. I played Magic the Gathering.
Hmm.
And Magic the Gathering has a similar thing where you're kind of reading your opponent and you're trying to you're trying to think ahead. Like chess, I don't know how many moves you could think ahead. I don't know how many the grandmaster thinks ahead, but usually you're at least 5 to 7 ahead of where this is headed. And in jiu-jitsu, it depends who I'm rolling with. Usually, I mean, most guys in the room are white and blue belts. So usually I'm trying to teach them something. I'm trying to get to a spot and have them figure out how to get out of it and then put them back in that spot and just over and over. And that's the whole roll. Sometimes you roll with a purple or a brown belt and they have really good moves or they're really good at something. Either they're in really good shape or they're really good at submissions or they're really good at position, but they're not they can't tie it all together. So I'm trying to just go to their weak spot to make my life easier. And usually people's weak spot is when when I could set the pace, when I could be on top of somebody. So in jiu-jitsu, the way that it's not like chess is I'm allowed to make more than one move at a time. Chess, I
Hmm.
make a move, you make a move, I'm waiting around for you to make a move. No. I'll make a move And now I know you're about to make this move, so I'm going to make this move, and I'm just always a step or two ahead. It depends how much better I am than somebody. But then there's people out there. I've been training 17 years. There's people out there that do that to me, and there always will be. There's always a guy that just has your number, that's just ahead, and that you'll never catch up. And even if you make a good move, the thing that also separates it from chess is I could exert myself explosively in a second and use all my power to just get out of that bad spot, and now we're back to neutral. And then you have to play this disheartening game where I was so close to pass, where I almost finished him, and now I spent too much energy going for that, and now he's ahead, and now he's got me on the back foot. And it is a game of saving energy and where to spend the energy. And when you're at the highest level, it's about, can I make this grip? Can I break this grip? And if you can't, or if you can't work your way around, like I can't, like there's some people that I'll roll with that are like, 250 pounds, muscles, and they know the right spot to grab. And if they grab that spot, I can't break the grip. It's just physically not going to happen. So what am I going to do about it? There's always another answer, a way around it. And this is why it's such a beautiful martial art, because somebody that's 100 pounds lighter can figure a way out. They just have to figure it out sooner. And you have to see the writing on the wall faster. And submissions come and you don't even see them, and then it's too late. So you have to recognize danger early as possible and adapt to it in real time. And that's something that's beautiful about it, because in real life, it's the same thing. How do you deal with these problems? Can you see a problem coming down the road a couple days ahead and you get in front of it? And now it's easy. It's smooth sailing because you could cut off a couple of these things that were going to be a problem, but that's not a problem because I prepared for that. So the more you do your homework in jiu-jitsu, the safer you could be on the mats. It's a lot of a mental game. And I think with Catholicism, it's the same thing. You need to practice, 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 so that when the bad times come, it's in your muscle memory to pray the rosary, to go to mass, to go to confession. Like if you're not already doing those things, when push comes to shove, you might forget all about that and you might turn your back on Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the worst possible thing you could do, because then the devil's got your back. So you need to turn towards Jesus, and that's the way that you protect yourself. It's counterintuitive sometimes because that's when the doubts come in. You at your worst, that's when the doubts are coming in the hardest. So that's when we need to be at our best. And that's why it's good to train in the worst possible positions in jiu-jitsu, because you're going to be here eventually. Somebody's going to be better than you and get you here. Are you going to panic here, or are you going to have a plan for when this happens so that you can eventually get out? Or maybe the timer's going to run out, because the pain and suffering doesn't last forever. There's always a time limit on it. So these are the things that I think about now as I look retroactively, and how I'm going to try to teach my daughters both. I want them to train jiu-jitsu for self-defense purposes, but also these little tests that you can't get in real life, like these mental tests of fortitude. Where, are you going to give up right now? I know you want to quit right now, but this isn't the spot
Mm-hmm.
to quit. There's certain spots where you have to submit and tap out, but then there's certain spots where if you pushed a little harder, you could have got out of that. And to be around people that could push you to that level without getting you hurt, that's the sweet spot. And that's what I was trying to do on the mats. Is I want to push people as hard as I can without hurting them, and get them to learn these little lessons that they don't understand how powerful they are and how they'll keep them out of trouble. Because some people ask, like, how do I get out of this worst position ever? It's like, well, you shouldn't have ended up there in the first place. There was a
Yeah.
lot of mistakes that led you to get to here. So how about we work our way all the way backwards to all these mistakes that happened first? And then maybe you won't end up in this position that often. But worst case scenario, you do end up there. Here's some advice for you.
Yeah, and I love the watch. My son is walking around the apartment right now, so I'll puff him up a little bit. He was training last night, and I love the process of watching somebody like learn. It's a weird way of putting it, but learning to think, right? Like learning to think through these things. Because I saw him yesterday; they were rolling, and he's only 9 years old. He's a gray belt. And he was rolling with this kid, and he was trying to put the kid in an arm bar, and the kid kind of locked like this. But I saw him, and I don't think the coach had ever taught my son this, and I had never taught him. But I saw my son put his leg against the kid's bicep and used his leg to like push the kid's arm so he could like get it free, and then he took this arm for the arm bar. And I was watching. I asked him afterwards. I was like, did somebody show you that? Or he's like, no, it kind of came to me while I was sitting there. I could push against his arm to break his arm free. And you see that quite a bit as like, I'm sure as a black belt, as you're training these guys, It's a great thing to see them start to think for themselves and start to strategize for themselves.
Right. So look,
And
this let me pause you right here because this is one of the perfect ways to explain it because that way will work. But I would not advise to do that. I don't take my leg and I don't put it on the forearm to kick it off. Now I could explain that to your son and we could it would be easier if I'm right next to him and I can
mm,
show him and he could feel what it's like and why we don't do that and why it did work against this kid. But I'm telling you, if you work against a kid that's a little better than you, that's not going to work. That's their opportunity to slip that arm out there.
mm,
And those lessons are the toughest to teach in real life. It's like, no, I got that to work, so that's how I'm going to do it now. And some people in jujitsu do the same thing. They're like, no, 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 I made it work that way. That's how I'm going to do it. And then when you roll with me, it's not going to work.
mhm.
You'll never break my grip like that. And I could show you an easier way to break that grip and a safer way that you don't give up the arm to do that. And that's
That's
what's
funny too.
go ahead.
No, sorry to interrupt. I was saying that's funny too because we were actually on the way there. We were talking about that because uh, one thing I've noticed, and again, I'm nowhere near your skill level. One thing I noticed is, he's got. We're going close to be 2 years soon, and you get some time under your belt. Then by the time you've been at it for 2 years, and I told him I was like, I don't know if you've been noticing this, but I notice when the younger kids, the ones that are coming in under him, and he can put them in a trap and roll them off. And he kind of takes his time to set it up and it happens. That doesn't work with the older kids. Right? Like you don't like as soon as like they've been doing it long enough and they're a little bit stronger. They see that trap and roll coming from a mile away, right? So you kind of have to either approach it differently or you just kind of have to work on your technique to where it's so fast they don't have time to catch themselves. But that's a great point too. And that's another thing. It's just like you're learning the difference between this is a guy that's coming in off the street who's never done this before, and this is what it looks like, versus this is me against a guy who's my level or better, right? Like I was always um, there was a few blue belts that when I was training, I would always like go try to train with them specifically because they were really great at sort of challenging my assumptions of what I could and couldn't get away with.
Yeah, one of the things I don't know if this is me thing or my personality type, but I always wanted to know who's the best in the room,
Mhm.
right? And when you're in jujitsu, there's the belt system, which is a pretty good gauge for how it goes, but it really is only the gauge of the teacher. That's one of the things with jujitsu is the belt system is subjective. It's very subjective. There's a lot of different types of black belts out there. Not all black belts are created equal. Some people hold them back. Some people give them too early, and that it's all subjective based on what you think. Um, when it comes to training, though, like if you give somebody 6 months of 3 times a week, you train 3 times a week for 6 months. I mean, you are leaps and bounds ahead of the person that's never even stepped on the mat. Like 6 months is a big difference. Like when I started training, I was 18, and me and my friends, like I said, we would wrestle around and stuff, but most of them didn't come. They didn't sign up. They didn't have the guts to sign up and actually take the classes. So I take the classes for a while. Now they're getting drunk at parties and they're like, come on, you want to wrestle? It's like, yeah, I want to wrestle. I've been waiting for this. That's what I've been training for. Being a white belt at drunk parties and just putting everybody in triangle chokes.
Mm.
And that's what it was. And they're like, wow, it's amazing. But I wasn't really. They just didn't train at all. But they actually did get a few of them to be like, no, I can't. He can't beat me. So then they joined, and I have a couple friends that are still training. A lot of them quit, but that's just the way of things. People come and people go, and your training partners change, and sometimes you leave to different schools. So that's a big part of the game too, is adapting and if you don't make a community there, you're not going to make black belt in a vacuum. Like it takes so many different people to make it to black belt.
Well,
And
you were just saying, if I could
yeah, go
pull
ahead.
you back to what you were just about to say is, and I used to do this too, and it actually um, takes humility on the part of the person. Again, another Christian virtue, and it takes a certain fortitude, another virtue, right? To because the natural thing that you want to do as far as like our innate human laziness, I would go to the gym and I'd be like, all right, there's a new kid over there. I know he's not going to be a problem. I'm just going to roll with him. He might be a little crazy, but I could handle it, right? That guy over there is the best, and I want to steer clear of him because he's the best. That was sort of my nat. But then I was like, no, you know what? I need to go spend time with that guy. That guy's the best. I need to humble myself. right? And then I need to have the fortitude to like commit myself to going over there. And I learned more by doing that than I ever would. And I mean, again, like I gladly roll with the white belt any day, right? But um, I was always I was like you, man. That was my approach, and I learned that kind of early on. That was I would say that for just about any martial arts. You step into the gym, humble yourself, right, and then try to find the best in the room and ask them questions and train with them. And yeah, it's gonna, excuse my language, it's gonna suck, right? But that's how you're gonna get better, you know. And you were kind of hinting at that a
Yeah, I
little
know.
bit.
I kind of got away from it because I all these different thoughts come into my head. So when I found my teacher, he was the best guy in my opinion in the room, even though he wasn't the highest belt. The way that he taught class, spoke to me, the way that he rolled, like you were saying, like the calmest guy ever, just destroying people. He's not strong, not big, just an average sized guy, no muscles, and was just destroying people. So when he opened the school, I went to his school, and I'm still with him today. Like he's the guy that does his homework. He doesn't take days off. He gets sick rarely. No vacations. He's on the mats 7 days a week. He's on other people's mats. He's teaching classes, and I don't know. I knew that. I was just a kid still, but I knew that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the guy that's really in it, because there's only so many hours in a day, and if he's spending most of his hours trying to get great at this, and he's still doing it 20 years later, I mean, literally can't get better than that unless you're like a professional athlete. You know, that's the thing he's missing. He doesn't have the professional athlete. He doesn't have the youth. But if he did, I don't. I'd put his technique, his technical knowledge against anybody. Like the minute details. I would ask him questions over and over again. Because the first guy I had, he would charge me. He said, if you want that, you have to take a private. So you got to like charge you money to even ask me a question. My teacher wasn't like that. He's not, super business oriented. He's jujitsu oriented. So if I have 1,000 questions, he's gonna give me 1,000 answers. And if you ask good questions, mentors love that. They love a good question, and they love to take you down the rabbit holes that they're currently traveling, like uncovering. That's why I love talking about Catholicism right now, especially is because I'm literally in the process of uncovering these things that I've been kind of acting out, kind of, and now I could really be more focused and purposeful, and I can find the people that have the answers to these. And I'm doing my mentorship thing towards Christ now instead of jujitsu. But that's one of the good things about martial arts is you could go towards mentorship and find a virtuous mentor that teaches in a way that's similar to Christ. I know Christ wasn't doing jujitsu, but if he was,
Mhm.
that's what we're looking for. How do you act it out? How do you make people better? How do you you're helping the weakest of us, the smallest person
I
can
want
do
to
it.
quote my just to interrupt you. I want to quote my wife said I need to mention it because when my son first started taking this about a year, I mean, after a year of taking it, about a year ago, he was in the car one day and he said, I think if Jesus knew a martial arts, he'd know jujitsu.
He
And
definitely.
I mean, okay, he's the Lord and Savior of the world. He didn't, he raised his arms against those at the temple, right? But I'm not trying to imply that Jesus would be out beating people up, right? But there is a real sense of humanity in the way that Brazilian Jiu Jitsu approaches self defense.
Yeah, they give you the opportunity to give up before you
Mhm.
get hurt, and that's the main thing. That's why we can keep going hard. All right, shake hands, go again. You get me an armbar. All right, shake hands, go again. You get me in a guillotine choke. All right, shake hands, go again. There's nothing bad's happening unless you go too hard, or unless I let my ego get involved, and I don't want to tap to you.
Mhm.
You're just a white belt. I'm not tapping to you. Listen to me. I'm a black belt. Sometimes you get a 250-pound white belt that has a good move, and he puts you in a bad spot. Tap. It's
Yeah, I mean,
perfectly fine.
you guys aren't going in and wailing, throwing punches on each other, right? Like unless you walk into like a mixed martial arts place, your standard Brazilian Jiu Jitsu school, like I would say probably over 95%, 90 to like 99% of them, you're not going to be only in so much as like how to avoid being hit. I would say, right? Am I correct in that?
There's guys that show different types of stuff. If somebody grabs you this way, to do certain throws. Um, yeah, a lot of schools now are just doing jujitsu. I mean, maybe
Mhm.
they'll have a wrestling class, maybe they'll do judo, but it's not necessarily true that they're going to have striking in any capacity. But there's a lot of schools that do. So it depends if they're more of an MMA gym or just a straight jujitsu gym. I think that's what's beautiful right now is the sport's growing in a way where there are more just jujitsu, and that used to be where you had to do striking because I mean, jiu-jitsu is getting bigger now than it ever has.
Hmm.
And before that, it was really just mixed martial arts, which was still on its way up. I mean, mixed martial arts from when I started to now, I mean, it's one of the major sports now compared to it was not even on ESPN. Like they wouldn't even let it highlights of it on ESPN when I started. And now it's such a mainstream sport, which is great for jiu-jitsu because to be a mixed martial artist, you have to know jiu-jitsu
Hmm.
just like you have to know wrestling. Like those two things you have to know. If you don't know jiu-jitsu, you're never going to make it to the highest level because you can't protect yourself.
Yeah, I knew a guy. This was years ago. This is actually when I had first discovered Brazilian Jiu Jitsu through my teacher. There was another guy, and in hindsight now, this was maybe a little cocky of me, but he had the oldest karate school in the area that I was living, and I knew he was a friend of the family's, and I knew he was he was a sensei, he was a teacher, he'd been doing it since the '70s, older guy, and I was like, hey, had you ever seen the U.S. This is the UFC was still kind of it was coming to its own at the time. This is the day of like Randy Couture and those fighters. So earlier on, um, and he's like, yeah, I think I heard of it. I've never watched it though. So I had the DVDs of like UFC 1 and 2 or something like that. I was like, you got to sit, like we got to sit and watch these DVDs. And he was not happy about Hoist Gracie at all. He thought it was like
Gimmicky
unsportsman. He thought it was
sports.
unsportsman. Yeah, like okay, because he had been trained in this. If a man is going to fight another man, he needs to man up and go toe to toe with him. And this is like sneaky, right? Coming in and what's this? Why is he on the ground? What's this choking him? Like that's like he saw it as like a more of like a rat game or something like that. And I was like,
That's
okay, I'm like, look, this is an interesting thing to consider, right? Because and I think this is actually plays into a little bit of the difference between how some of the people of the Orient, right? People historically of Asia versus people of Europe have approached um, martial arts and warfare in general over the centuries, right? Because if you like read about Christian knighthood, there was a certain code and ethics, right? And it was two men that meet out on the battlefield, and you got your gear on, and it was mano a mano. You try to make it as even for the opponent as possible. Whereas if you read, for example, like Sun Tzu's Art of War, he's about no, like you want the war, you want battle to be as asymmetrical as possible, and you want to have the advantage always, right? Like that's the trick to war as far as like the historical way of the Asian approach to it. And I think you find that filtered through the Brazilian channel as it came back up into the U.S. because that's it's really what it was. There's a strategy in war. I was a huge war history buff, and there's a strategy in warfare called asymmetrical warfare, where if you take like uh, King Henry V when he fought against the French at Agincourt, his yeoman had the longbow, right, and so that was a weapon that his opponent, that the French knights didn't have, right, and he wiped out the French knights that day. And there's other examples of that through history, but that's kind of what happened with UFC 1, right? Like the Gracies came with the game with a weapon that nobody else had really, right? And so yeah, if you're going to go with like today, if you're going to go into mixed martial arts, if you're listening to this, I'm sure you're probably already aware, but if not, like you have to go through a combo of different techniques, including ground game and your stand game. But I would say even today, Eddie, and maybe you could let me know your thoughts on this. For most people within the sound of my voice here on this channel, I think, like you said, even 6, 7 months, though it's a lifetime commitment in many ways, as you said as well. But even just 6, 7 months, you're going to be like well beyond what the average person is that you meet on the streets. Would you say that's fair to say?
oh yeah, that's more than fair. I mean, if you train 3 times a week and you're not short changing yourself, you're not going for the easy rounds. But when you're first in there is no easy rounds.
Hmm.
You're gonna get your butt kicked by a lot of different people, probably some girls and teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna happen. Humble yourself. But like you're saying with the asymmetric warfare, that's exactly what jujitsu is. A 4 versus 1 against my 4 limbs against your 1 limb. I win. How do we get there? It's difficult to get there, you know. And off your back, you can get there. You know, you don't have to go anywhere else. That's why the closed guard is dangerous. I would give the advantage if we're even in jujitsu. I would rather be the guy on bottom with my guard closed around you than on top, because to do anything on top, you have to break their legs first to pass. There's not really submissions. There's some gimmicky submissions you could do from top, but if you know that they're coming, they're not going to work. So there's only so much you could do on top and close guard. You have to get their legs open. So in MMA though, that the game changes. If you could throw elbows on top of somebody, now it's a little bit different. You can get
Mhm.
hurt. So you don't want to. You actually don't see as much close guard anymore in MMA unless the guy in bottom's in real trouble. There's not a lot of action going off the back because guys got so good at defense and so good at throwing elbows and stuff that the person on bottom just wants to be out of it unless they're like the highest level black belt and the guy on top isn't that high. But if the guy on top isn't that good at jujitsu stuff, they'll just say, "Stand back up. Let's just fight again." You know. So yeah, the thing about East versus West, like judo was first. Judo
Mhm.
was a martial art that the Japanese used to teach. It was a teaching art. It wasn't about fighting. It was to teach the children discipline. And you know, there is aspects of it that is, you know, for fighting, but most of it was just stand up and how to balance and how to do these throws. Um, when the Gracies actually flipped it on its head and said, "No, we're going to do 90% on the ground and 10% on the feet." Once they got back to Japan and they were having success, the Japanese humbled themselves and said, "You know what? We should have been doing it this way. This is how we're going to do it now too." They do both now.
Mhm.
I think that's a humility that sometimes in the West we don't have. It's like, no, I make it work this way. That way it looks foreign and cheap, you know. But then meanwhile, how did the American Revolution? How did we win? Did we win straight up, or did we have to any means necessary? You know. And jujitsu, there's a lot of rules. But for those first fights, yeah, no rules. You know, I'll do whatever it takes to win. That's how you have to do it. That's how what a martial artist does. That's what Musashi did. He didn't win all his fights the same way. His fights weren't always a fair fight. Sometimes you have to fight multiple people. So sometimes he would mess with them psychologically. Like he'd show up way earlier than them, or he'd show up way later than them where they don't even think he's coming, or he show up when it's raining outside when people don't want that. Like taking things that are abnormal and putting them to your advantage. I think that's one of the things I have against people that don't train is I know all these different things that you could do that you don't even know that you could do. What's most likely that you're going to do? Your son's going to put his foot on my bicep. Boom! I have a move for that already. Like if I already have all this stuff in the chamber, and you only have one or two, you know, once you exhaust your list of things to do, that's when the panic comes in. That's when your muscle memory comes in. So if you're not really practiced, that's why you can know right away. So to find out who's the best in jiu-jitsu, it's pretty simple. You just got to get on the mat and roll with them. As opposed to if somebody has a black belt in karate and they're 85 years old, it's hard to tell, you know, how good they are unless you see the students. A student is a great representation of, you know, who you are. And I think that's one of the problems that Catholics have is sometimes there's some bad Catholics out there representing us, and that's the only Catholic that some people know. And they're like, yeah, I know a Catholic. They don't take it serious, and that's one of the problems. That's why I want to try to bring that aspect of jujitsu into it. Is I want to make my teacher look good. My black belt's not for me; it's for my teacher. He gave that to me. He thinks that's how good I am. So when I go out in the tournament, or if I go to another school, if I'm going to show moves on the internet, they represent him. And the same thing with Catholicism. Like if I want to call myself a Catholic, I better represent Christ in the way that our early church fathers did. And how they do it, that's why it's good to read up on history and some of these saints.
Yeah, Eddie, and that's actually kind of what I want to like bring the conversation around to is the bulk of my channel. If you look up the analytics on your channel, you see find some interesting things. The bulk of my channel is like young men. I think the age range is like 19 to 25 or something. I forget how the age range works on their analytics as they break them down, but that's like the biggest demographic that watches my. It's almost overwhelmingly like 80% or something like that, and that's a key demographic for you could always have there's a huge conversation in martial arts about the place of women in martial arts, and there is I'm sure you would agree there's definitely a place for women in martial arts. It's its own subject though, it's its own conversation, and since I have so few women that watch this channel anyways, it would almost be negligible to discuss it. But for the young men, Eddie, I think there's so much out there right now that's trying to um, make a
Distract.
bridge for young men
Okay,
to
bridge.
to
Okay.
to reach to reach them, right?
Yeah,
The
yeah, yeah.
crisis of manhood, they call it, and things like that. And there's a lot of really bad advice out there. Like there's a lot of really bad advice out there for young men. But I would say the good news is that it really doesn't take much to do it right. It just takes a few things that need to be in place. One of the biggest challenges, if you were to ask me, that I think that young men face right now is that so much of their social interaction is done online,
Mhm.
right? And I was never the biggest guy. I was never the toughest guy. I was never the most athletic guy by far. I was always one of the last ones picked for the basketball team. You know what I mean? Like I was not the most. So in order for like men to have the sort of interactions that we have with one another, like I found my place in the gym, right? In the martial arts gym. That's kind of where I was able to find my place. And there's definitely a world in martial arts. There's a group of men in martial arts that are the call them the meatheads, the just basically kind of like street punks that ended up in the gym somehow. They're out there, man. I'm not going to deny. But there's also like just really super solid guys that are in the gym, you know. And like you said, especially like if you could find that older mentor. If you're a young guy, man, you're 19, you're 20 years old, and you can find that mentor. Uh, I was so blessed. I can't even like begin to express to you guys like, and it sounds like it's kind of a similar story for you. I met a martial arts coach, and he changed my life, man. I didn't have a lot of good male role models at 17 years old, right? And this guy, he was super tough, but he was also super calm, collected, and he would sit. I mean, we spent as much time in the gym like he would sit down with us and just talk to us, right? Like, hey man, this is how you treat another man, right? This is how you judge another man. Like his work his moral codes, right? How you like he was talking about how you shake a man's hand and how you look him in the eye and these kinds of things. Like I don't think young guys are getting those kind of conversations when they're trash talking each other online, right? And look, guys have always trash talked each other, man. It's just a thing that guys do, and I get it. But there's a real difference between trash talking someone that's directly across from you versus like typing it out on a keyboard. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. I don't know about you, but like one time when I was younger, I was maybe 8, 9, 10 or something like that. And I was playing basketball with some of the big kids and I ran my mouth too much, right? I started trash talking one of the big guys and he slammed me on the asphalt, right? And that's a lesson that sticks with me to this day. It's like, oh, okay, you run your mouth, there might be consequences, right? But these young guys, man, I think their interactions online are such that I think it's not only um, I guess you could lean to the word cowardice a little bit, though I think they thrive on it. I think they thrive on the fact that they can talk trash on you and there's nothing you can do about it. And I kind of get it, but at the same time, there's also something about gauging a gauging a man face to face, right? And having that kind of interaction with them where it's like, okay, I have to be careful how I especially if it's a stranger on the street. Like I don't know this man, I don't know who he is, I don't know his intentions. Where um, they're not learning those kinds of lessons. So, anyways, man, this is kind of a long, kind of rambling on here, but just kind of my way of like saying that I think there's a one of the answers. There's several different things that I would suggest for young men, but one of the answers, man, and it's not a cure all, but I think it's a good step in the right direction. Like, do you have advice for the young guys that are watching this channel? Based on your own journey and your own experiences, uh, what is like that benefit for them to take that? Because you're right, man. It's a big like for me. I was all in. Like I saw Bruce Lee, and I was like, I don't care what I got to do. I'm stepping into a gym. But there's a lot of guys, man. It's that hesitancy taking that first step into the gym for them.
Oh yeah. I mean, the reason I went was because my friend found the gym and said, "Hey, we're gonna sign up," and I had the courage of him. He's doing it. All right, I could do it too. That kind of thing. One of the unexpected things that I didn't know going into it was the the benefit of being around men. And
Hmm.
you're not just around any kind of men. Like if you go to a regular jujitsu gym, 8 out of 10 of the guys there work a full time job. They have a family. They got a career, and they're coming straight from work to get their ass kicked by a teenager. You know, not just that though. It's not just come fight, go home. It's come a little bit early, do a little chit chat around the gym. What's going on? Let's take the class. Stay after. Ask some questions. Maybe stay for 2 classes. I know some animals that go to work Monday through Friday and they'll do 2 jujitsu classes back to back. It's
Hmm.
insane. That to be around that type of person on a day in, day out basis, to see the growth of certain people, when you've been in the gym 10 plus years, seeing who stays, it will surprise you because most people don't stay. Only 1% of people make it to black belt. I forget the numbers, maybe 50, like it's a small percentage that even make it to blue belt. I
Hmm.
think of the people that make it to blue belt, only half of them keep going. Some people say, "Oh, good enough. I know enough to protect myself, and that's it." And they're missing out on everything else that comes with it. And I think the same applies to the Knights. That's why I love the Knights immediately. I've only been a Knight for 6 months, but it is where I'm supposed to be based on what I learned in the jiu-jitsu gym. You're around these men that have lived almost a full life. I mean, most of the guys are 70 years old. They got grandchildren, they retired, and now they're dedicating their time to the church, to Christ. And these are the men that you have to be around. That stuff
Hmm.
washes over you. And these guys do get inspired the same as you get inspired, but in a different way. It's inspiring to see a young guy come in and to be zealous for the Lord and for the church. And you don't know how much you're helping. Like if you're a young guy and you step into a gym, you can rejuvenate that place. Sometimes, new students don't come or new students don't stay as long. Sometimes a group of teenagers will come in together and then they all leave together. Or, just stuff happens. Sometimes people run out of money. They can't pay to train. I've seen them make it work then too. Like if you're willing to put in the work, people will find a way that you can get your training in because you make everybody better if you're in the church doing it the right way. You make everybody better if you're in the gym doing it the right way. I'm a fireman too. It's all the same. It's all the same.
Hmm.
It's constant training, doing my homework so I can protect the guy next to me. I protect myself too, protect the people in the community, make a good name for jujitsu, make a good name for church. Like that's what my life is dedicated to, is to pay back these institutions that help form me into hopefully the man I am today, so that when my daughters get older, when they think of a man, what is a man? My dad's a man. Well, what does my dad
100%.
do? That's what I. So if you aspire to have a family, that means you aspire to be a man. And if you want to aspire to be a man, you have to. Voluntary suffering, I think, is necessary. Like involuntary suffering is inevitable. Voluntary suffering prepares you for the inevitable, um, for you and those around you. Because courage is contagious, just like I think cowardice is contagious. So if you're hanging around a bunch of cowards on the internet, you'll become an internet coward. Vice versa, if you hang out with a bunch of brave people in person and you watch and you keep your mouth shut and you see who's who and how men handle other men that are out of line, how men handle men that are in line, how to become a man from out to in and from in to out. There's all variations of it, but you have to be out there. And yeah, it's tough. That's the cross of this time, is to balance the online life with the in person life. But I think there's such value. Like we wouldn't be having this conversation if online didn't exist. We
Hmm.
probably wouldn't even know each other. But this is a way to help people to do the in person stuff, because the in person at the end of the day is that's where everything comes from. Like our conversation would change if we're in person. Like the closer we get, the energy changes, and we can feel and feed off of it differently. And yeah, my advice to young people, young men, is to be around older men of all generations. Be around younger men too, and work together. I mean, one of the things I'm reading about, Blessed Michael McGivney, who started the Knights of Columbus, and one of the things it says off the bat is he was good with all ages, all generations. That's who he was good with. That's who you want to be. You want to be a man that could interact with all generations, and we could all help each other. Whether you're younger, whether you're old, you can help the other person.
Yeah, that's great, man. I think it's, we can easily, it's hard for me sometimes, right? Because if you're super excited about something that other people aren't excited about, right? But
This is where I feel like
enthusiasm can be contagious, and I just can't express enough like how beneficial it is, what an impact it made on my life, and I can see, what an impact it made on your life. And I think many of the young guys that watch this channel, if you haven't already. Especially jujitsu, because I think as Catholics, and again, this is going to be the majority of my channel, be young Catholic men. You want to be a strong man, right? I do think we have a crisis of strong men. The men that we have that are strong aren't necessarily the best models of strength at times, but that's not always true. But we could always use more, right? There's never too many good strong men, right? We can never have too many of that, like a good thing, and a way for you to channel that to become strong, to become the kind of man that would make a good husband, that would make a good father, right? You need a lot of there's certain tools that you need to get to that point, right? And you also don't want to be the kind of guy that's going to, like, as a Christian, we're not going to, it's not appropriate for us to take a threat, even if it's a real threat, and to do more violence to that threat than what's necessary to null that threat, right? And I mean, God willing, none of us have to be in a situation where that happens. But we live in a chaotic world, often violent world. There's always going to be a necessity for certain men to do violence on behalf of society, and there's not really many better options out there as far as hand-to-hand combat, but it's applicable, as we've been discussing today, in other aspects of one's life too. But as far as hand-to-hand combat goes, as a Catholic, as a Christian, I think Brazilian Jiu Jitsu kind of stands and towers above some of the other options that are out there. So, yeah, that's my thoughts. Eddie, do you have any closing thoughts on any of this that you want to throw out there?
I need to start training again. I've been on break because I got 4 young daughters, so I've been spending a lot of time at home trying to build my family connection. But
You'll forget more than most of us will ever know, Eddie. So,
I gotta get back out there. But you know what I can say is Catholic living has sustained me. Usually when I've always taken breaks throughout it took me 15 years to get a black belt. It should have took 10, because 5 of those years in between, I'll take 6 months off here, 3 months off there, just let life happen, because I wasn't in a rush to get it. And usually on those breaks, I'm usually itching to get back because there's a hole that's left that needs to be filled by jiu-jitsu. That hole is filled by Jesus now. So it's been harder to get on the mats, but I know that once I get back out there, I'll get the bug.
That's the beauty of the gospel, Eddie, too, is that the gospel, there was a lady that told me one time, it's actually the icons over there, you won't be able to see it, but I have an icon. It's one of my favorite icons. It's of Christ laying out the universe, right? He has a compass, and he's measuring out the universe. And a lady that I know was raised in the 50s, 60s, whatever, and she had a nun teacher that had a like when you're in elementary school, the teachers have posters on, like, inspirational posters on the wall. Well, this nun had a poster that's had that icon, and the caption said, "To Christ through math." Right? And it's like, that kind of affected me. It wasn't my own classroom, but I was like, okay, so we can approach Christ, we can find Christ, or if Christ isn't there, we can apply Christ to so many different areas of the things that we do in life, And I do believe that there is a place, a very, 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 and I don't think it hasn't been taken advantage of yet, where we maybe should be, and you would be the prime person. This is my encouragement to you, Eddie, right? To go back to the mat where Catholicism, Thomas Aquinas says that grace elevates nature, right? And I think there's something natural and real and beautiful about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where if we had these graced Catholic men going into the gym, right, that we could elevate the art to the next level. So that's my inspiration for you.
I know. I got to figure out a way to do it. I don't know how to do it, because I have I could put a link for you for my Instagram, and you could see I teach a bunch of techniques. Well, I did. My friend used to let me teach class on Friday nights, so I used to record all my classes and then put little clips out of the moves that I showed. And I have a pretty good library, and that's something that I would like to get back to.
We should create like a Catholic Jiu-Jitsu Instagram sphere where we combine the two on the regular.
I just got to change the name of my Instagram to something Catholic. Right now it's Sweaty Eddie BJJ. because my friend gave me that nickname when we were in high school, and it stuck because I do sweat a lot. Um, but before I got to Catholicism, my reversion, I used to call it vehicles for virtue. Like jujitsu is a vehicle for virtue where you could live a virtuous life through jujitsu. It could be firefighting, it could be parenting, and it's still that way. That's right, but it's not virtue. It's for Christ. Like anything that you could do. It's hard to be courageous in the real world right now. Like for a young man, how do you show your courage? Like
Hmm.
when I was a young man, I was a fireman, and I show my courage by going inside the burning building. Most people won't do that, so it's a way for me to test to see like when push comes to shove, do I have the courage? Jiu-jitsu is a place for that. You want to enter a white belt tournament? That's the scariest place on earth. Because those guys are going as hard as they possibly can, and they have a year of training, and that's scary. I mean, most of my tournaments I ever did actually were white belt tournaments, and they really test you. They, I just did a tournament a couple of years ago. It was my last tournament as a black belt, and I remember the night before saying, "What am I doing? Why am I? Who am I proving this to? What am I?" I was afraid, scared, and that's where you test it. Like, am I going to show up? Or what? I've been training for this. Everybody I know knows I've been training for this. Can I show up and perform? You could do that as a regular person. You don't have to be a black belt. You could be a white belt. Go train with people, and there'll be people in your corner there. That's how it always is. It's very rare for you to go to a tournament where there's nobody there rooting for you. You'll find somebody. Hey, oh, he's from our school. I'm going to go, even if I barely know him. I've coached people that I barely know because he's got my name on his back of my school that I go to, and we help them out. So we're all here to help each other in times of suffering, in times of tests. This whole life is tests and trials. So if we can get some practice tests in early, then we'll be better when push comes to shove.
Yeah, I mean, a man always needs something that he's willing to die for, and I think all men at some points in their lives think about, would I be the guy that would step in when the moment comes? And I think a good measure of whether or not you're the guy that would step in when the moment comes is, are you willing to step into the gym, right? Are you willing to step into the tournament? Are you? And I think those guys are the guys that are more likely to step up when those moments do arise, as they have a tendency to
As
do.
long as they're not self-serving, because some guys are doing that for the medal. Like
Oh
for
yeah, yeah,
example,
yeah,
like we
yeah,
were
for sure.
talking about earlier. There's plenty of guys like that. Not
But
everybody.
like you, man, like a guy that would run into the burning building, right? Like there's a sacrifice and it's like, would I have the guts to run into that burning building? None of us, we truly don't know until the moment comes, right? And then when the moment comes, there's people that run from the gunfire and there's people that run to the gunfire, right? And it's like, which man am I? I like to think I'm the man that's going to run to the gunfire and try to, be the man of the hour, but it's hard to know, right? It's hard to know. But I think a good sign of it is the way that we approach the world when there's not an emergency. So,
Yeah, and I mean, there's a spiritual war going on, whether people like to admit it or not. And the
mhm.
way to fight the spiritual war is you're either on the devil's side or you're on Christ's side. So you have to find the men that are on Christ's side. Knights of Columbus is an obvious example of whose
Mhm.
side is they're on. So um, that's what I'm going for right now. I'm trying to tie that into everything, Knights stuff, helping out the community, understanding what true charity is. Because when you're a young man, it's hard to give charity. You're just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for your own existence, your own identity. You're trying to stand on your own 2 feet. So sometimes charity gets lost a little bit. And if I was a younger man, and this is advice to all younger men, if you're young 20s, late teens, find a way to give. Find a way to give, even if you don't have that much. Find a way, and you will be surprised what comes of it. These little gifts of charity, they turn into something you can't even imagine.
Well, Eddie, you had mentioned Instagram. Where can people find you if they're looking for you?
Well, if you're looking for me for Catholic stuff, Knights of Columbus stuff, the Eddie Wilson channel on YouTube. Me and Brian did a nice episode again about St. Maximilian Kolbe, which is on there. I have a couple episodes with some seminarians we support. Also, I'll send you a link to my episode with Drew the Catholic. I was on his podcast talking about my whole reversion story. Uh, it's a pretty interesting story, I think, and I'm trying to share with people to just make connections. If somebody out there right now that's listening to this does train jujitsu, reach out to me. Because I was thinking about having people send me videos and stuff, and I could critique them. Or if you live in the New Jersey area and you want to train, I'm ready to get on the mats. Any excuse. If somebody just says, "Hey, I live here, let's go train," I'll do it. So,
Amen.
and
Amen.
I'll provide a link to the Instagram. Also, if you do train jujitsu, I have a couple slick techniques on there, very fundamental, that I'm hoping to get back to soon.
All right. Well, we'll include all of that in the show description. Eddie, I appreciate you coming on and taking the time, and we'll have to have you back on soon. It's a lot more that we could have discussed today, man, but I always have to edit myself. I don't want to be the Joe Rogan podcast where we go for 4 hours. So I have to get you back on, man. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks for having me.